والسلام على سيد المرسلين وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. سبحانك لا علم لنا إلا ما علمتنا إنك أنت العليم الحكيم. سبحانك لا فهم لنا إلا ما فهمتنا إنك أنت الجواد الكريم والرب زدني علما. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. إنما جزاء الذين يحاربون الله ورسوله ويسعون في الأرض فسادا أن يقتلوا أو يصلبوا أو تقطع أيديهم وأرجلهم من خلاف أو ينفوا من الأرض ذلك لهم خزي في الدنيا ولهم في الآخرة عذاب عظيم إلا الذين تابوا من قبل أن تقدروا عليهم فاعلموا أن الله غفور رحيم. صدق الله مولانا العظيم. So yesterday we had talked a little bit in detail concerning the basic translation of these ayats, and this is concerning the muharaba, or those who fight against Allah and His Rasul, meaning those people who fight against the order of Allah and His Rasul, the social order and civil order and law and order. And so they kill and loot and rob and frighten and spread terror in the land. So this is spreading chaos and terror in the land. So there's a severe punishment for them, as we mentioned. They will either be killed, or they will be crucified, or their hands and feet will be cut from opposite sides, or they may be expelled from the land. And we explained in detail the positions. Either these are possibilities that the qadi, the Muslim judge, can decide, or they have specific areas or specific instances or circumstances of application. If killing and looting and spreading terror, or only killing, or only looting, or only spreading terror, so these options are available. And it was also mentioned that this is, of course, a very severe chastisement and humiliation and degradation in the world, and in the hereafter there will be a severe punishment, except for those who actually do sincere tawbah. And talked about that tawbah, that in the world it may be excused in terms of that very severe, specific punishment for the muharib. Otherwise, the rights of the slaves, rights of the human beings which have been crossed and have been compromised, killing or looting or property, so those are to be recompensed unless those people involved, the victims involved, excuse. And those punishments, by the way, there's the question, if a punishment which is allotted by Sharia, and a specific punishment is allotted when we have what we call hudud. So I think it might be suitable to mention the three different types of punishments which are allotted in Sharia. Now, in the penal code, there's basically, they establish laws and they establish punishments, or they just leave it up to the judge to, establish whatever he feels like establishing, which leaves things very arbitrary. In Islam, there are three different types of punishments. And number one are what we call hudud. Hudud basically mean limitations, and these are actually limits and exacting punishments which are what we call mansus alayh. They are mentioned specifically in Quran and Sunnah. These hudud are connected with the rights of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And they cannot be, there's no arbitrary, aspect regarding them. They are set, they are specific. Nobody can change them. Even the Prophet ﷺ. For example, there was a woman, after the conquest of Makkah, there was a woman from one of the very powerful tribes of Makkah, and her name was Fatima. She was from the tribe of Makhzum. And she was caught stealing, and she admitted it, and her hand was cut. And so people thought, oh my God, this is going to have terrible impact. These people have just accepted Islam, and one of their women has now, her hand is going to be chopped off, and so this is going to be, so we better talk to the Prophet ﷺ and tell him, look, let's take it easy, And so they thought, who can possibly, mention this to the Prophet ﷺ, because he's not going to listen, So they mentioned that probably, if anyone, he'll listen to Zayd radiallahu anhu, his formerly adopted son, and then his freed slave, and the one who he loved very, very dearly. So Zayd actually went and talked to him concerning it. So Nabi ﷺ gathered everyone and gave them a very succinct and very stern sermon, explaining that these are the limits ordered by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Nobody can change them. And he said, this is how the former peoples were destroyed. One of the main, in elements for the destruction of the former people, that when an injunction of the Sharia imposed by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala himself has been imposed, then what they would do when the rich or the poor, the powerful, were guilty of these crimes, they would excuse it. They would give them a lighter punishment. And when the poor and the helpless were convicted, they would establish, And then he said a very famous statement. He said, if Fatima bint Muhammad was caught stealing, I would have her hand cut as well. So this is not in the hand, in these hudud, these established punishments. They are very few. There's only 5. There's only 5 crimes which these hudud are concerned. One is the one that we've just read about, which is called muharaba, and those 4 options are mentioned in the Quran. The second is sariqa, which we also just mentioned, which is theft. So highway robbery, which is a collective, and it's a collective effort by a number of people, and it's affecting the whole society. And then theft, by an individual, some individual's property, and then the had of zina, adultery. And adultery, of course, is of 2 types. One is the person who has never been married in a proper Sharia marriage, and then one who has been properly married in Sharia. The one who has not been properly married, there is 100 lashes, and those who have been properly married, they are to be stoned. This is the same in the Bible as well. It's very interesting that the Christians and the Jews have a big problem. It's there in their book as well. That was the Sharia also. And in fact, as far as I know, all of the major religions for adultery and infidelity, the crime is death. That penalty is death. Also, qadf al-muhsanat al-mu'minat, slander, accusing the innocent men or women of adultery or infidelity when they cannot produce 4 witnesses that have seen the acts explicitly. Also for them is 80 lashes. And lastly, the had of the intoxication of the drinking of wine, and for that is 80 lashes as established in the ijma. So these are what we call hudud. They have the rights of Allah, and also connected are the rights of the servant, but the rights of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala are more overpowering. And so these hudud, there's no slightening of them or changing of them or interpreting or whatever. They are to be implemented as they have been prescribed. Now, the thing about these hudud is that they are, number one, there are very few crimes which actually exact these types of very stern punishments, and number 2, if there's any form of doubt, as Nabi alayhi salatu wasalam, fadru al-hudud bi-shubahati mastata'tum, hold back or do not or sort of defer these punishments by any kind of doubt as far as possible. For example, they have a big deal about this, stoning the adulterer or the adulteress. The fact of the matter is that to actually exact this punishment, there has to be 4 witnesses who have seen the male organ entering into the female organ. 4 people have to see this, and they have to swear by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in front of the judge. So, is that ever happened? It's never happened in the history of Islam until today. So, what about those who have been stoned? There have been. Or they themselves, not under duress, but rather very willingly and openly, they have admitted that sin themselves. As one of the women in the time of Nabi Sallallahu, she came in herself. She said, "Ya Rasulullah, clean me." And it was a 2-year ordeal. So Nabi Sallallahu, and the Qadi is supposed to say, perhaps you did something else. And in other words, there's no need for that. You go and make tawbah, and that's going to be sufficient for you. But she kept coming back to the Prophet ﷺ, and she said, "No, I'm pregnant. Okay, have your baby." She had the baby, and then ultimately, he said, "Okay," until he finishes suckling. In all of this process, Nabi ﷺ wants that she should actually just go away and make tawbah and chapter closed. But no, she insisted. And so she was, obviously now the Prophet ﷺ, as we said, it is a prescribed punishment. It has to be enacted. And Nabi Sallallahu mentioned about her that she has performed a tawbah that if it was spread over the entirety of Medina, it would have been sufficient, more than sufficient for all of them. So that's the thing. Five types of crimes which have prescribed punishments. There is no sort of change or there's no other option in that sense. Now, what about sariqah? Theft. Now, once it comes to the Qadi, again, if it comes to the Qadi and the witnesses are there and there is no doubt whatsoever, it has to be enacted. The same in theft. Now, suppose someone is caught stealing. Suppose I catch somebody stealing and I take him to the judge. Once it comes to him, there is no, his hand must be cut. Suppose I excuse him. I say, "Okay, look, I excuse you for the sake of Allah, and you make tawbah and don't do it again." Then it's okay. So you can, in fact, that happened in the time of Nabi Sallallahu. He said, so once the fellow who was the victim saw that the thief is going to have his hand cut, he said, "Ya Rasulullah, excuse me." He said, "Why didn't you do that before? Once it comes to me, I cannot do anything." This is, the very important aspect about these, punishments in Islam. They are for very, very, terrible crimes which highly impact society. And at the same time, it's very difficult to establish them. And if there's any doubt, they're to be relinquished. That's one. Number two are what we call the huquq of ibad, or these punishments which there is not a particular prescribed what we call the ta'zir. It's not a particular punishment prescribed, but it's up to the judge to decide what he likes. And these are various crimes which are not mentioned among the hudud, and which are not mentioned among the third category, which is qisas, which is retribution, which is just retribution when there is killing or maiming or bodily harm. So retribution in kind is to be exacted. And of course, the heirs in the case of killing can excuse, or the person himself who has been affected, he can excuse himself. So these are three types of punishments. One is hudud, they are prescribed. One is qisas, is retribution, which can be exacted, it can be excused by the person, the victim. And the other are those other crimes which are left to the discretion of the qadi, to the judge and Muslim, to prescribe as he sees fit. So may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala give us understanding that the superiority of our Sharia and its impact not only on the individual but on the society is far above all of the legal system which man has come up by himself. So may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala give us tawfiq to understand it, appreciate it, and follow it. Ameen thumma ameen. Wa akhir da'wana alhamdulillah.